Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 184 event, which takes place in Los Angeles, California. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 3 total bouts. Now also pay special attention to our MMA Oddsbreaker staff picks page. That's where we'll post any changes and any last-minute official predictions in case anything is going on during fight week, especially with the weigh-ins. Now briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 61 made history this past Sunday night, going 6-0 to win a whopping 33.9 units with our round robin on underdogs Adriano Martins, Marion Renault, Sam Alvey, and Michael Johnson. Although we did lose our free bet, which was a prop on William Macario in round 1. Back to the present, UFC 184 features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now kicking off the preliminary card is a featherweight contest between a pair of Ultimate Fighter Latin America veterans in Masio Fullen, who is 9-4, and Alex Torres, who is 2-1. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Fullen minus 170 to come back on Torres plus 130, and right now it's minus 155 plus 135. So lines basically just tighten up a little bit. There's more sports books that have since copied the numbers and added them as well. So margins have tightened across the board. It looks like you can get about 160, about 150, 160 across the board here on Don Best screen as well. So line holding steady, and it's a tricky one. It's not an easy one to bet because the dog here and Torres does definitely have a path to victory, but the problem and concerns with me for Torres is that he's still raw. He makes a ton of mistakes, and his cardio is a letdown as well. So I guess I should start off by saying these guys are both tough Latin America fighters, veterans from the TV show, and they didn't really have too much success on that show. Torres actually lost to Rubio in the opening round after he basically gassed out. He was winning that fight, doing well, and then got caught, so it's unfortunate for him, but he did show some promise and potential, as far as skill set goes early on in that fight. And then Fullen, he's also, like I said, a tough Latin America vet. He actually lost to, Morales in the opening round by head kick KO. So both of these guys, again, you know, you would like to see a little bit more success on the shows, but it is what it is, and they're matched up now. They were actually supposed to be, I think, on 180's card back then, but they got moved to this show, and we're going to see probably a pretty competitive fight. I mean, Fullen is the more experienced vet. I think, you know, he's known a little bit more for his striking, but he's a well-rounded fighter for sure. He does look for takedowns as well. He's decent off his back, but, you know, not that great, but he does have some skill, and he's capable of landing some subs here and there. On the feet, I think he does his best work in the clinch. He's got good knee attack as well. And, you know, in this situation, he probably is the better striker. Now, I think Torres might have a little bit pure power. He's a little bit of the better athlete. I think Torres has the better wrestling, the better takedowns. I think he's more than capable of controlling to start off things here against Fullen and kind of having the fight play out the way he likes to. But at the same time, I'm kind of going back and forth on this fight because I think Torres has the bigger upside. He's a more talented fighter, but he's still so raw. And, I mean, mistakes that he makes on the ground kind of, you know, they stick with you. He's not a solid enough fighter or somebody, I guess, that's very dependable even in his best attribute, which is the ground. So he is physically strong. He's got solid wrestling, looks for takedowns often, and he probably will get it. But as the fight goes, again, with his cardio and just his question marks as far as defense goes, I think it leaves you a little bit suspect with his chances to win this fight. So I've been going back and forth on this fight. Definitely a tough one. It's near pick'em for a reason. I'm going to slightly lean towards Fullen right now because I expect his cardio, and I think he's got a little bit less defensive flaws overall. in this spot here. But I do think Torres has some more upside. So I'll look and see again how they weigh in and, see what they look like and see if I change my mind before then. But right now I'm slightly leaning towards Fullen in a fight that's a really difficult one to bet, to be honest with you.
And I'm going to disagree. The main thing for me here is Fullen has had some issues with grapplers in the past. He has had issues getting taken down. He's had issues when he is off of his back in terms of getting back up to his feet. And while he is a pretty good offensive striker, he does have some issues when he's forced to be defensive. And I think that Torres is a good enough athlete. He's young and robust enough that he can go out there and force Fullen to fight defensively. The biggest advantage for Fullen in this fight is if the fight stays standing for extended periods of time, he should be the better overall striker. And he does have more experience, and he is the better conditioned athlete. So one thing I'm a little worried about in terms of Torres is if he comes out strong and then runs out of steam, and then Fullen could just finish him off as he gasses. Now, overall though, I do actually think that Torres can get the takedowns and win this fight. I'm just a little worried about him running out of steam, but I think that he can pull it off. Honestly, neither of these guys should be in the UFC at this point in their careers. They have done very little to deserve it, but I'm going to pick Alex Torres to get the win. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have James Krause, who is 21-6, taking on Valmir Lazaro, who is 12-3. Now Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Krause minus 160 to come back on Lazaro plus 120, and right now over at 5 dimes, it is minus 175 for Krause. Lazaro is plus 155. And by the way, I got to give the plug to 5 dimes. All lines that I am quoting today are courtesy of 5dimes.eu. So 175, 155 right now. A little bit more support coming in on Krause at 5 dimes. And, I don't blame him because of what we've seen in Lazaro. Of course, if you look at his fights before his UFC debut, on film, you see a lot of potential. The guy, Lazaro, is a very talented striker. He's got a lot of power. He's working on his wrestling for sure, and you can tell that he's improving his takedown defense and his offensive wrestling in his own right. So he's got a lot of ability, and I think a serious upside. But then he made his UFC debut against Vic. Wow. Sloppy mess. Defensively, he was, I think, a little bit worse than, again, you get to see on footage before tape study, or before the UFC, like what you saw before he made his official debut. Just gas tank issues, defensive issues all around. His striking was really sloppy as well. So I was disappointed from the actual product that entered into the UFC, because I was expecting a lot better things from Lazaro. Now, that being said, Krause, you don't really have that with Krause. You know what you're getting from him, and he's a very complete and technical fighter that has a pretty good skill set overall, no doubt about it. James Krause is a veteran of the sport. He's been in there for a while, and he's been fighting solid competition. He's coming off of a competitive decision loss to Masvidal, which isn't necessarily a bad loss, because honestly, Lazaro should be a little bit of an easier fight than Masvidal, obviously, for him as well. And he's fought some pretty solid competition. And Krause is the type of guy that on the feet, he could pick you apart. He is technical. He's got a little bit of power. He's smart. He mixes things up well. On the ground, of course, with that length, he's got pretty good BJJ. He could, catch an arm, submit you to triangle. He's got various ways he can beat you on the ground from top or bottom. So he is a very complete and technical fighter. But the problem in the kryptonite for Krause oftentimes is if he faces a better grinder wrestler that can avoid the submissions, he could probably get beat. And that's what people look to do to Krause. They look to put him on the ground, just kind of cautiously fight and stay away from his submissions and then grind him out a little bit. Now, Lazaro, I think, even though he's more of a striker, I think he kind of can mix things up enough to make things interesting and get Krause to the ground. But the problem with Lazaro is I'm not as confident in his, submission defense overall. Krause is pretty slick, and I guess I have to see a little bit more from Lazaro so he doesn't end up getting caught in anything stupid on the ground, even if he does look to take Krause to the ground. Now, on the feet, this fight's going to be close because Lazaro does have that sloppy aggression, but he is powerful and he can be effective at times for sure. So Krause has to be wary about that. He can't, even though Krause is a more technical fighter on the feet, Lazaro is going to be just as dangerous for sure. So I could see either one of these guys really clipping each other along the way and rocking each other and doing enough damage to maybe finish the fight. So that's a little bit dangerous there. But overall, you have to, again, kind of side with a more dependable fighter. And here in this spot is definitely Krause. I think Krause is a little bit better. He's kind of gaining a little bit of confidence since he's made his, return to Zuffa or whatever, since he's made his return against Sam Stout in the UFC. He's got a little bit of momentum, a little bit more fan support on his side. He knows that he belongs, and you know what you're going to get out of him. Lazaro's just a little bit too sloppy and a little bit too concerning in most cases for me right now. But I am going to lean towards Krause a little bit because I do think he is just the cleaner, the better overall fighter at this point. So my official pick is James Krause.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree that the main thing for me here is Lazaro just is a little sloppier and not nearly as technical as I was expecting based on watching his film before his UFC debut there against James Vick. I mean, I was really expecting him to come in and really try to pick Vick apart on the feet and look really sharp and technically sound on the striking department. And he was wild, he was sloppy, his defense was not good, and he really wasn't sitting down on any of his strikes. Maybe it was the UFC jitters, I'm not quite sure, but I was not impressed whatsoever really with his performance. And, he's going in there against a guy in James Krause that's very solid, who has already faced some really good UFC veterans in his 4-fight UFC stint already. And I don't think that this will be too much of an issue. I mean, maybe Lazaro is going to be a little more aggressive than Krause here, so it could be a little difficult for Krause to respond and get things going. But once he settles in, Krause should be fine on the feet. And then in terms of the grappling exchanges, Krause is definitely the better scrambler with the better jiu-jitsu and better submissions. I mean, he had a really impressive performance in that UFC debut against Sam Stout, and I could see him doing some really unique stuff on the ground in this fight as well. So, overall, I just think that Lazaro is just a bit too wild and reckless, and Krause is going to find some openings and make him pay, because Krause is a better striker in my opinion than James Vick, and Vick was able to land some really good shots against Lazaro. So I'm going to go with James Krause. Now moving up to the heavyweight division in the first fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Derrick Lewis, who is 11-3 with 1 no contest, taking on Ruan Potts, who is 8-3. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shipped at things so far?
Well, I opened Lewis minus 385 to come back on Potts plus 265, and the action has come in on Lewis. Right now, it's Lewis minus 500. So actually, since the last time I looked, it went up even more so. The comeback on Potts is now plus 400. So more support coming in on Lewis. Not a surprise. I mean, I knew Potts wasn't going to get a tremendous amount of respect. Honestly, he's a talented guy as far as maybe on the smaller shows, but as far as being UFC level, even though the UFC heavyweight division is fairly weak, I'm not sure Potts belongs, to be honest with you. So he's got a little bit of power on the feet, Potts does. He's got a little bit of skill on the ground for sure as far as submissions go. But it just stylistically how they matched him up, it hasn't fared too well for him at all. And I don't think this is going to be an exception here with Lewis, because Lewis is the bigger, stronger fighter. He's obviously got a big advantage on the feet. If he doesn't get clipped by one of Potts's, Potts does throw with power, and he's aggressive at times. So if he doesn't get clipped by anything from Potts as far as haymakers go, I think Lewis will have all sorts of success in this fight, because I think Lewis, if he wants to get top position here, I'm not saying he should, but if he wants to get top position here, he can get it easily once he gets top position. Potts does have some pretty neat reversals, and he looks for submissions, but I think Lewis will be savvy enough to avoid any of that stuff and just drop some bombs, similar to what Hamilton did against Potts once he was on the ground as well. So Lewis has more paths to victory. Lewis is the more, I think, sound fighter overall. I mean, he has power on the feet. Lewis is the type of guy that's really hard. Even if you do get him to the ground, he's hard to hold down. He's got good takedown defense. He usually manages to scramble and end up in top position as well. So I think Potts' best chance is to kind of catch Lewis along the way with something, but unfortunately for him, I think he's probably going to get put out before he gets that opportunity. So I'm not going to take too much time on this fight, because I think it's kind of a no-brainer a little bit. Lewis has to bounce back from his kind of surprising knockout loss. I mean, the surprising part was it happened in like 41 seconds or whatever it was against Mitrione. It's not really that shocking that Mitrione beat him actually, but at the same time, just how quickly that fight ended is a little bit, like I said, surprising. So Lewis wants to bounce back and redeem himself. He started off in the UFC very well, and he wants to get back on the right path. So I think this is his good spot to rebound and get a W here and look pretty impressive. So my official pick is going to be Lewis.
I'm going to go with Nick here and not waste your time too much. I mean, we all know how this fight's probably going to go. Derrick Lewis is really big. He's extremely strong and very powerful. And when he gets on top of people, his ground and pound is absolutely devastating. And Ruan Potts comes from that South Africa background. He's just not a very good overall fighter, and he doesn't have very good takedown defense. He's not good off of his back, and he doesn't have a very good chin. So when he's taken down, he gets beat up, and he's been knocked out twice pretty quickly in his first 2 UFC appearances. And I think the same thing's going to happen here. Basically, Ruan Potts has a puncher's chance on the feet for about the first 30 seconds of the fight, and if he doesn't knock Derrick Lewis out, Derrick Lewis is going to take him down, and Derrick Lewis is going to finish him on the ground. So I'm going to pick Derrick Lewis here, and I'm pretty confident about it. Now, dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Dhiego Lima, who is 11-2, taking on Tim Means, who is 22-6-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Means minus 140 to come back on Lima, even money, and the line did flip originally early on, making Lima the favorite. Now it kind of flipped back, so right now over at Dimes, it's minus 125 for Tim Means to come back on Lima is plus 105. So basically a pick-em fight with a very, very slight lean towards Tim Means in this spot, and I agree with that. I'm actually going to pick Tim Means as well. I just think that, this is going to be an interesting fight for sure, because Lima is a very talented fighter. In all areas of the game, the guy has knockout power on the feet, the guy has decent wrestling, the guy has a good submission game on the ground, whether he's on his back or on top, and he can grind you out. So Lima is a very complete fighter, but he does have some question marks. He does tend to slow down as the fight goes a little bit, like most fighters do. So it's nothing too major, but also his chin is a little bit suspect for sure. His strike defense is as well, and he's just not as good as his brother. A lot of people, I think, have kind of given this Lima a little bit too much respect, because I think they're assuming, or they're in the back of their minds, they think Dhiego is as good as his brother Douglas, and he's just not. Douglas Lima, I think, is definitely the better of the two. So if that makes sense a little bit, I think Lima gets a little bit more hype and a little bit more respect because of his brother. His brother, of course, as we know, is the Bellator champion, and he's a tremendous talent. And I just think he's a better version of Dhiego. And that's a whole other scenario. I'm not going to get into Douglas at all, but I'm just trying to state the fact that that's why I think this Lima gets a little bit more respect, because people do expect to see some of the same things that they see from Douglas. But that being said, how he matches up with Tim Means here in this spot, it's an interesting matchup. Both these guys can stand and bang, and both of these guys usually have some success doing so. But Lima, I think, is going to probably want to take this fight to the floor. Means' kryptonite has always been against outstanding grapplers or grinders or wrestlers that have been able to take him down and just kind of grind him out and avoid the striking game, because in most cases, Tim Means really outstrikes most he faces. So he's just kind of got that relentless, almost like that Diaz style, that he's always in your face throwing stuff, but he's got a little bit more zap in his punches, and he's got some knockout power to go along with it as well. And he does have that killer instinct. So Means on the feet is a very difficult out, even for talented strikers. So I think Lima's going to want to get the takedowns here. I think Means' takedown defense overall is a little bit underrated. I know, again, he's been put on his back against outstanding grapplers, and he's been controlled that way, but he makes life miserable for all those people, and they've been all difficult fights. So this is going to be another one, I think, for Lima. If he does try to get this fight to the floor, he's going to have some difficulties here. Means going to, try his best to keep it upright. So Lima's going to struggle with the takedowns, and if it stays up on the feet, I think you do got to give the advantage to Means. I think another spot where you really know what you're getting with Means, and on the feet, he just pushes forward. He has a pretty solid chin, and he's going to come in for the kill. So I think more times than not, this fight should remain standing more so than on the ground. And if that's the case, then Tim Means should win this fight. So it's going to be a very competitive fight. I'm sure it'll be close, even if it's a scorecards. But there is a better shot, I think, of this fight ending inside. And if that's the case, it's probably Means stopping and finishing, Lima along the way. But if not, I think that Means wins it on the scorecards as well. So my official pick and lean is going to be towards Tim Means.
And I'm going to agree that the main thing here is I'm just a little concerned about Dhiego Lima's chin. Obviously, he got knocked out on the Ultimate Fighter finale. He was fighting a middleweight, but then he dropped down to welterweight, and he faced a guy that bumped up a weight class from lightweight on short notice, and he did not perform that well. He got some takedowns and ended up winning a decision, but it was not that impressive of a performance. I was really expecting a little bit more out of Dhiego Lima in the UFC, but overall, I don't think he's quite ready to take on these guys that are, some of the best welterweights in the world. Tim Means, on the other hand, he is extremely dangerous. He's powerful. He has some really solid striking, and he's aggressive. His Achilles heel has been his takedown defense, and in terms of getting back up to his feet, sometimes he's way too content to really be aggressive off of his back and active, and it keeps fights on the ground when they shouldn't be. So what this fight's going to boil down to, in my opinion, is probably Tim Means trying to knock Dhiego Lima out on the feet, and Dhiego Lima trying to get some takedowns and hold Tim Means down and smother him a little bit. And I'm not a big fan of that game plan for Dhiego Lima, the survive 3 rounds plan. And I think at some point in this fight, Tim Means probably connects on Dhiego Lima's chin and puts him away. So I'm going to side with the dirty bird here, and I'm going to pick Tim Means. Now this takes us to a bantamweight contest between Roman Salazar, who is 9-3, and Kid Yamamoto, who is 18-6 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Yamamoto -210, the comeback on Salazar +160, and this line has seen some movement. Yamamoto's now -330, the comeback on Salazar +270. So a tough line to set, honestly, with all the time off that Yamamoto's had. I mean, 3 losses in his UFC career, so he's looking for his first W here, and he's been out since February of 2012, since his armbar loss to Von Lee. So those question marks alone make you kind of scratch your head and wonder about Yamamoto. But obviously the early action coming in his way didn't really fend people off of coming in that way at all. It didn't scare them off at all. They have the support. Stylistically, it is a good fight for Yamamoto, because Salazar, even though he's better than what he showed in his debut against Gagnon, I think that he's still stylistically a pretty good matchup for Yamamoto, because Salazar is not a real aggressive fighter on the feet. He's going to be a little bit longer. He's going to have a slight reach advantage. And of course, he's going to be a little bit taller. But overall, Salazar's the type of fighter that's not overly aggressive on the feet, and he doesn't really use that reach well to his advantage when it stays standing. And Yamamoto is obviously the better striker on the feet. He's going to be faster. He's going to be more powerful. He's just going to be purely better. Now, wrestling wise, even in the wrestling department, Yamamoto typically is going to be a decent enough wrestler in most cases that he's going to be able to keep fight up and actually end up on top if he wants and on the ground. But Salazar, I think, is going to be in this case looking for the takedowns, and he's going to be scrambling to try to get on top of Yamamoto as much as possible here, and maybe even look for the sub. But I think Yamamoto is going to be able to fend off everything and probably outpoint Salazar, if not finish him, because Salazar's defense on the feet is a little weak as well. So Yamamoto has enough power, and he's going to have that sense of urgency for sure. I mean, he's 37 years old. He wants to get that first W in the UFC, and I'm sure the UFC matched this up, so the guy has a legit shot to win. I'm not taking anything away from Salazar, but it is what it is. I mean, they gave him an opponent that in most cases, he should come through with a W here. Yamamoto should. So I do understand why people are betting him, but I think it's a little bit more dangerous because, I mean, Yamamoto his chin's looked a little bit more suspect as of late. He just hasn't looked like he's the same fighter that was, one of the world's best, when he was fighting in Dream and K1 and all those organizations. So, I think that it's Yamamoto's fight to win or lose. It just depends on which version of Yamamoto you're going to get. If he has enough left in the gas tank, and as far as chin and everything goes, he's going to win this fight. So I am going to pick Yamamoto. Danger's definitely there if you are laying that kind of juice against Yamamoto, but really I think it is matched well. I mean, it's a fight that more times than not Yamamoto should win, so he is going to be my pick.
And I'm not quite convinced. Obviously, Kid Yamamoto is one of the greatest lighter weight fighters of all time. I mean, back in the day, he was on near the tops of every pound-for-pound list in terms of mixed martial arts. But that was so long ago. That was multiple knee injuries, multiple layoffs, multiple long extended absences from the sport ago. And Kid Yamamoto is not the same fighter. I mean, if the Kid Yamamoto from 2002 or 2003 showed up, this would be a blowout. But he's 37 years old now. This is a completely different sport. And it's shown. I mean, he went 0-3 so far in his UFC career. I mean, he's still a name, but that name is losing a bit of its luster. And he has not fought now in 3 years. That's ridiculous. So, against Roman Salazar, even though the guy's 0-1 in the UFC, you have to give this guy a chance against Yamamoto. Salazar's 27 years old. He trains with a solid team with Frankie Saenz, who just scored a huge upset win over Yuri Alcantara a few days ago, and Henry Cejudo, one of the best wrestlers and athletes in the lighter weight classes, a gold medal winner in wrestling. So I think that Salazar will come in here fully prepared. Obviously, in Salazar's UFC debut, he didn't look very good, but he was taking a fight on short notice against Mitch Gagnon, one of the better bantamweights on the roster. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, Kid Yamamoto, he has power. He has some pretty good overall striking still. His wrestling background was always one of his strengths back in the day because he used the wrestling reverse to keep fights standing and just lay people out. But again, he hasn't looked the same. I mean, you look at that last fight against Vaughn Lee. Yeah, he cracked Vaughn Lee with a nice shot, but then he got blasted by Vaughn Lee, and then he got finished with a submission on the ground. And against Roman Salazar, he could get in some big trouble here. Salazar, heading into this fight, this is his first fight competing as a full-time fighter. He's taking his MMA career extremely seriously now that he's in the UFC. So I'm expecting a few leaps in overall skill heading into this fight, especially with the people he trains with. And I would not be surprised one bit if Salazar is able to hold his own on the feet with Yamamoto. And then on the ground, I wouldn't be surprised one bit to see Salazar get some takedowns and hold Yamamoto down. The main thing here is, as good as Yamamoto was at one point, he's 37, and you just don't see a lot of guys that are that old competing in any weight class below lightweight. You don't see a lot of guys competing that old in any weight class, but especially in the lighter ones where they really rely on speed and reflexes and quickness. I just don't think that Kid Yamamoto will quite have that same ability that he used to have. I mean, that's just how the way the world works, unfortunately. I know, as crazy as it sounds, I'm actually going to pick Roman Salazar. I think that he could get some takedowns. He could win a decision here. And who knows, depending on if Kid Yamamoto is as far gone as he potentially could be, then Salazar could even finish him if he gets him in the right spot. So I'm picking Roman Salazar. I'm not crazy confident about it just because there's so many questions about Yamamoto, but I think this kid has a chance to pull off the upset. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Mark Munoz, who is 13-5, taking on Roan Carneiro, who is 19-9. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Munoz minus 280, the comeback on Carneiro, plus 200 right now, looking over at 5 dimes. It is minus 325, plus 265. So more support coming in on Munoz. I understand it. I mean, Carneiro really should be fighting at welterweight. But he is taking this fight on short notice, replacing Magalhães, so he can come in and, get a spot back in Zuffa here. So I understand it, and you gotta admire that. He's in for a tough test. I mean, Carneiro overall is a veteran of the sport, of course. He's 36 years old. He's been around for a long time. Initially, he had a decent little run, in the UFC. A little bit up and down, as far as wins, losses go. But he fought relatively decent competition and fared okay. In most cases, he was competitive in most of his fights and, even had moments there against John Fitch early in, his career that, surprised a lot of people, especially in that first round. So Carneiro has a lot of ability because he's such a well-rounded fighter. He's more known for his wrestling, his grappling, being a BJJ black belt. But he has developed some skill on the feet, and he's getting a little bit more confidence with that skill on the feet too. He's got a little bit of knockout power. So what you're getting with him is really a good, solid, well-rounded mixed martial artist. But he is facing a tough out here in Munoz. Munoz is obviously the bigger, stronger fighter. He's going to have the wrestling advantage here coming into this fight. And Carneiro, that's the thing with him. Even though he is a really good jiu-jitsu practitioner, he has been put on his back before. He has actually been submitted, I believe it's 4 times. So even though offensively he's gifted in the submission game, his defense is still lacking there for sure. So Munoz, I think, can have some success if he gets this fight to the floor and kind of grinds out Carneiro a little bit. Typical Munoz fashion. If you look at Munoz's fight with Bosch, that was pretty impressive overall. I know that Munoz himself has kind of had some tough spots recently. That fight that he's coming off of, that devastating sub loss, he was getting just smashed by Mousasi before that. That's unfortunate for him, and of course he got knocked out by Machida before that. But his fight against Bosch was really impressive. He just basically ragdolled control Bosch the whole time, and that's not easy to do. So, that tells you a lot right there. Even though he's coming off legit losses to 2 of the best in the weight class, I still think that you could see what Munoz is made of from time to time. And when he does show up and he's in great shape and his mind's in the right place, Munoz is a very tough out. So I do think he's going to win this fight. I think Munoz even has enough power on the feet to maybe, land something as well. He's got some underrated boxing, but more times than not, Munoz is your typical grinder. He's going to try to look to get this fight to the floor and have success there. And I think he will do it. So not an easy fight though, because Carneiro is game. And of course, Munoz, if anything, any flaws with him, it's got to be that suspect chin. I mean, I don't trust it, honestly. Even against a welterweight, I mean, Carneiro is not going to be that much smaller, even though he is fighting up at 185. And Carneiro does have enough power on the feet that he could catch that chin as well. So there's an outside chance Carneiro finishes Munoz. That's the caution, I think, and concern about this fight, because Munoz's chin is that suspect. But overall, I still think Munoz, and most cases, should get the W here, and I am going to pick him. So Munoz is my official pick.
And I'm going to agree. I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time with this. Carneiro is taking this fight on relatively short notice, and he is a little bit of a smaller middleweight. I mean, obviously he's fought at welterweight most of his career, so I think that he's going to have a lot of trouble as long as Mark Munoz goes back to his roots, which is all about the wrestling and the ground and pound. That's what makes Mark Munoz great, is when he was able to get on top of fighters and just wail on them. His ground and pound is still one of the most dangerous things in the UFC when he's on top of people. And if he can go back and get on top of Roan Carneiro, I can absolutely see him finishing this fight. Now, if he leaves openings, if he doesn't come in great shape, then he could have some issues. But I think he's incredibly motivated here. He wants to go out there and get a win, and then get an opportunity to fight in that Philippine card coming up. So I think that he's extremely, extremely motivated to put on a really good performance here against Carneiro. Carneiro is a vet. He's got some solid jiu-jitsu. He's fought in the UFC before. Granted, it was ages ago, but so he knows he's pretty experienced, and he's coming off of a really crazy performance where he won 3 fights in one night for that Battlegrounds promotion. So I expect Carneiro to come in and be game, but if Mark Munoz comes out the way that I expect him to, then Munoz should be able to get his takedowns going, and he should absolutely be able to land some strikes on the ground. The only concern here, obviously, is Munoz's chin, and if he can't get any takedowns going, he could give up some positions. He's not great off of his back. He's not super impressive defensively. If somehow Carneiro is able to stuff some takedowns and maybe spin around and take his back. So I do expect Mark Munoz to win, but again, 37 years old, Carneiro's 36. Obviously, Munoz could be on a bit of a decline, but I'm not going to throw in the towel on him just yet, because he did lose to 2 of the better middleweights on the roster. So my pick will be Mark Munoz.
Now kicking off the main card is a lightweight contest between Tony Ferguson, who is 18-3, and Gleison Tibau, who's 40-10. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Ferguson minus 210, the comeback on Tibau, plus 160, and right now looking over 5 dimes, minus 220, the comeback on Tibau's plus 180. So has been going back and forth. It was a little bit lower, now a little bit higher again. Two-way action coming into this fight. You don't really get to see Tibau at around 2-to-1 dog price very often, or I should say plus 180, plus 200 it might get to. So that is a little insane, because Tibau is always one of the top tier lightweights, always a tough out. We know what he brings to the table. He's a grinder. He's got actually pretty decent stand-up skill. It continues to improve. I mean, he's a southpaw on the feet, which makes things a little bit interesting. And his boxing's getting better. It really is. I mean, he can be very effective in his striking with his power as well. But he's more of the grinder. He can hold you up against the cage. He can control the tempo of the fight. He can get some takedowns. He's very hard to take down as well. So wrestling, his submission game's on par. So quality wins all over the place for this guy as well. So you got to respect that in him. He's a stud. I mean, there's no question about it. He's a tough out. That's why you don't really see him as a big underdog. Most of his fights, even if he's a favorite, they're fairly competitive in close lines. Ferguson getting that respect, because Ferguson, I think, matches up relatively well, honestly, against Tibau. Ferguson has good wrestling in his own right. I know people are going to point back to the Castillo fight and say, man, Castillo was able to get him to the ground, control him that way. Ferguson arguably should have lost that fight. I agree with that as well. His fight IQ for that fight was definitely bad, but I think his takedown defense as a total is pretty solid. I mean, he's not the easiest guy to get down, and especially if he's aware and his fight IQ is a little bit sharper on that day, he could be very difficult to take down. Now, Ferguson's submission game is very dangerous as well. He's got kind of those long limbs that makes it even more interesting. And then, of course, on the feet, I think it's where he's best at, honestly. I mean, He uses that offense good. Again, he has that length and the reach advantage over most people. He's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage over Tibau here in this situation as well. And he has power to go along with it. So Ferguson's going to be the better striker here. He has enough takedown defense to keep the fight upright in most cases, I think, against Tibau as well. I think the submission game will probably neutralize each other out. I don't see Ferguson submitting Tibau in this spot either. I don't see Tibau really submitting Ferguson. So I think what you're going to see here is a competitive back and forth battle. Tibau's going to be looking to kind of grind Ferguson out. Ferguson's going to look to kind of neutralize that and get off in his attack. And I think we're probably going to see Ferguson have a little bit more success here. So I'm expecting Ferguson to at least get the nod on the scorecards by winning 2 out of 3 rounds. If not, possibly even get a finish. Tibau has been knocked out 3 times in his career. I know it doesn't happen very often to him, but at the same time, it is possible. And Ferguson hits with enough power and accuracy that he can get the job done as well. So either Ferguson by KO, or I think it's going to be Ferguson on the scorecards for me.
And I'm going to disagree here. The main thing for me is that Tony Ferguson does have some issues in terms of his offensive striking. He really is only effective with his jab when he's in open space moving forward. And Tibau usually puts some good pressure on his opponents. Even though Tibau isn't an amazing striker, he's competent enough to hold his own against most anybody. And the other problem with Ferguson, obviously, is even though he has that wrestling background, his takedown defense has not been very good, especially recently. The last 2 fights, he's been taken down at least about 4 or 5 times. And he's facing, in my opinion, one of the best wrestlers he's faced in his career. So Gleison Tibau is in a really good position here to go in there and grind Ferguson out and really slow this fight down and make it a little ugly. And that's basically how Gleison Tibau always fights. So it'll be really interesting to see the dynamic here. Tony Ferguson has more power. He's definitely got a reach advantage, but he doesn't use the reach advantage very well when he's getting pressured. As you saw in the Abel Trujillo fight in his most recent performance, Trujillo got inside on him very easily and was connecting with some big shots, even dropped him at one point. And Ferguson really didn't start to use his reach until Trujillo slowed down and got tired in the second round. Now, Ferguson, his other problem is when he does get taken down, he seems to get a little too comfortable off his back. So I am a little worried there. In this fight, I can definitely see Tibau getting some takedowns, getting top position, and the real main advantage for Ferguson, other than pure punching power and reach, is his conditioning. Tibau cuts the most weight in the division. We all know this, to cut down to lightweight. Because of Tibau's weight cutting, he always slows down in the 3rd round. That's pretty much been a staple of his fights. He wins the first 2, and then he has to coast a little bit in the 3rd, give that away, and win a decision when he wins. So, honestly, I think that's going to be the case here. Tibau's probably going to win the first 2 rounds, in my opinion, with that wrestling grinding style, maybe some clinch work as well. And then Ferguson will have to try to get that comeback late. And it could happen. Ferguson could get, a knockout in the 3rd round, but I think Tibau is smart enough and a good enough veteran to avoid the stoppage and to go out there and win those first 2 rounds. So my pick is Gleison Tibau. Now, what do the numbers tell us for this one, Reed?
Well, you guys mentioned a few important themes here, and the numbers do back those up. First of all, Tibau's wrestling is arguably among the best in the division. His takedown defense is phenomenal. He ranks among the all-time greats, 93%. And he's faced a whole lot of them because we have tons of data on this guy. And offensively, he's done well just generally controlling opponents on the ground. So on the flip side, Ferguson does appear to be most vulnerable on his back. He actually has good takedown defense, but when he's been put on the back, he was controlled and he generally hasn't really initiated to take other people down. So he is going to want this to be on the feet. He's going to want to exploit that 5-inch reach advantage that he has. And his power striking is actually pretty good. His accuracy is low, which is kind of weird. But on a punch for punch basis, Ferguson's knockdown power is quite good and Tibau is surprisingly low for someone as muscled as he is. Tibau kind of has this Terminator style. He comes forward very slow and steady. He doesn't get into a barn burner. And he's got good defense. Not a lot of striking offense though, and arguably I would say he's more susceptible than he is dangerous because he's been dropped 3 times, only 2 knockdowns to his credit. So toe to toe with Ferguson, I think the pure striking matchup definitely favors Ferguson here. It's the big question mark as to whether or not Tibau will want to take this fight down, and if he can get it there, if Ferguson can stay off his back. Because that will definitely draw out this fight and change the dynamic of it. Because otherwise, if these two guys just go toe to toe, you talk about Gleison Tibau's weight cutting. I mean, he is a big dude and he does gas noticeably. Ferguson will go hard for 3 rounds. But that scenario is something we saw play out against Danny Castillo. Ferguson got the win, but Danny Castillo did make it very, very close. He just took him down, held him there. And it wasn't that hard. With a guy like Tibau, who is excellent at wrestling, he could do the same thing. So, you guys have mentioned fight IQ, and all these factors are making an interesting fight because it could go a few ways. Overall, I like Ferguson here, especially if he stays standing. I do think he's going to tag Tibau at some point, and do some damage, maybe put him away, but he has to stay off his back, and that's the question mark. So, it's a little bit dangerous, but I gotta lean with Ferguson on this one.
Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Alan Jouban, who is 10-3, taking on Richard Walsh, who is 8-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Jouban minus 385, the comeback on Walsh plus 265, and this line has seen some movement. It's Jouban now minus 450, the comeback on Walsh is plus 360. So more support coming in on Jouban, and a lot of that's actually due to his loss. He was so competitive, and a lot of people, it was such a controversial division in his recent loss to Alves that people really believed, a lot of people thought he won, and a lot of people, including myself, I mean, he was definitely game in that fight. A lot of people think that his stock rose from that fight, and I believe it's true too. I mean, Jouban is one of those guys that continues to improve. I mean, he's been in the game for a little while now, but obviously training with good partners, over at Black House and 10th Planet and whatnot too. He's getting a little bit more, experience. He's getting a little bit more confidence. And every time you see him, I mean, even on some of the fights in RFA, from Access TV and stuff like that, you could see the improvement level. I mean, to me, Jouban is a striker, a very good striker, capable of finishing most people, but I mean, his takedown defense, his wrestling, even his jiu-jitsu continues to improve. He's hard to hold down. He's hard to take down to begin with. His takedown defense improves with every fight as well. He's just hard to control. And then on the feet, he's a handful to deal with. I mean, he brings it, has a lot of power. There's just a lot to like about Jouban's fighting style. I mean, he's a very exciting fighter to watch. So stock on the rise for sure. And Walsh, on the other hand, I mean, he's coming off a very controversial loss, as well. That's a funny thing here because a lot of people believe that he should have got the nod over Kunamoto in his last fight. Walsh is kind of one of those guys that has a lot of power. He's just a powerful guy for 170. Big, strong, not really the best skill set. He's got a little bit of power on the feet. He's got that grinding style that, can pin you up against the cage, work a little bit there, maybe look for some takedowns, control you there on the ground as well. But he's just not great anywhere. I think on the feet he's very hittable. And that's not a good thing with a guy like Jouban. I think, Jouban can have some serious success teeing off on Walsh on the feet as well. He's got to be a little cautious because there is concerns a little bit with Jouban's strike defense. He does get tagged at times, and defensively you would want him to be a little bit tighter for sure. But I don't think Walsh is going to be able to do enough damage, to Jouban in that department. So I think if it stays standing, which it will, Jouban has a big significant advantage on the feet. I think Jouban's going to land enough to do some serious damage. I'll point Walsh at least, if not, again, another spot where he possibly finishes Walsh along the way. Walsh's best shot is to try to slow this fight down, make it a slow, boring type of fight by keeping Jouban up against the cage by, again, maybe getting a takedown or two or maybe trying to land that big punch. But other than that, I don't think he's going to have too much success. So it is Jouban's fight to win or lose. I understand why people are coming in that way, and I agree with it. So my lean is officially Jouban, and I'm expecting some good things out of this guy at 170.
And I completely agree. Alan Jouban, as Nick mentioned, stock went way up after that Warley Alves fight. I mean, I did not give him the benefit of the doubt whatsoever heading into that fight. I really thought that he was going to have some issues dealing with Alves, because I expected Alves to be one of the better prospects to come out of the Ultimate Fighter in quite a while. But Jouban really impressed me. His striking was sharp. His defense was improved. He proved he could handle some of the big strikes that Alves was throwing at him. I had questions about his chin, and he proved those too.
And then somehow Alves walked away with a decision. I really did not expect that after watching the fight. So I really think that Jouban's coming in here with momentum despite coming off of a loss. Now Walsh, on the other hand, another close controversial decision loss to Kiichi Kunamoto. And in that fight, he actually had Kunamoto in a world of trouble early after landing a huge strike on him during a takedown attempt. And he just wasn't quite able to put him away. And then he did slow down a little bit as the fight went on, and Kunamoto was able to walk away with a really controversial close decision. But speaking of in terms of who they faced and how their skills have looked, I mean, Jouban is just significantly better than Walsh and much more technically sound. Walsh is more of a scrappy type fighter that wants to make it ugly, and he does have some power. But Jouban, he can definitely pick you apart from distance. He has some pretty good overall striking on the inside, has some nice elbows, and overall, I think that his takedown defense is very good. So I don't see a lot of methods to victory for Richard Walsh unless he lands that one big shot out of nowhere. And I think Jouban should be talented enough and technical enough to see that coming and get out of the way. So overall, I see Alan Jouban just picking Richard Walsh apart over the course of 3 rounds and maybe even finishing him. Richard Walsh just isn't quite on that level yet. He's going to be competitive against some of the bottom tier UFC welterweights, but against somebody like Jouban, who I think has a lot of potential, I just think that Walsh is going to be outgunned. So my pick is Alan Jouban.
Now, sticking with the welterweight division, we have Jake Ellenberger, who is 29-9, taking on Josh Koscheck, who is 19-8. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Up in Ellenberger, minus 165, the comeback on Koscheck, plus 125, and right now over at Dimes, it's Ellenberger minus 210, the comeback on Koscheck is plus 175, so more support coming in on Ellenberger, and it hasn't really been two-way action, it's been a little bit more one-way action here with obviously more support coming in for Jake. I understand it. I mean, Koscheck, if you're looking at it, Koscheck is 37 years old right now. I mean, he's been out since November of 2013. He's coming off KO losses to Woodley and Lawler. There's a lot of question marks behind Koscheck for sure. A lot of people are surprised that he's still under contract or whatnot, or, he's still relevant at all in the UFC welterweight division. But that being said, I still think that Koscheck might have a little bit something left in his tank, and this is probably a good fight for him to come back to as well. I know Ellenberger's a tough matchup for most because, he's got tremendous amount of knockout power, no doubt about that. So Koscheck with a little bit of a suspect chin now and a little bit of decline, that might not be a good matchup for him, but if he can manage to not get KO'd, I think he's going to be game in this fight, and he has potential to pull this upset off as well. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but let's not forget, before the Woodley and Lawler knockout, Koscheck actually took Hendricks to a very competitive decision. I actually thought Koscheck deserved to win that one. I know it's back a couple years ago, it's back in 2012, with the Hendricks fight, but still. So I think if Koscheck manages to survive this fight, he has a good shot of winning on the scorecards. He could possibly, find a finish against Ellenberger on the ground, or even, he's got enough knockout power in his own right that he could catch Ellenberger as the fight goes as well. So that's not out of the question, but all that being said for Koscheck, in support of Koscheck, I still think that Ellenberger does have a little bit more upside. He's a younger fighter. He's had a tremendous career. It's not like he's a young fighter in fight years either, because the guy's been around for a long time. But he's still only 29 years old. I think for the UFC, there's more upside for him as well. A lot of people were thinking Ellenberger was right there. He would get that title shot and, would be a threat to actually win a title at welterweight. It just hasn't panned out for him. So I know he's going to want to rebound and come back from, again, a slew of losses. He's lost 3 back-to-back fights, Gleison, Lawler, and McDonald as well. So he definitely needs a win, over Koscheck to kind of stay relevant and keep his job security really in the UFC at all, and kind of get that confidence back and maybe get him back on track here. And again, he has got pretty good takedown defense, and I think he is the better overall striker. He's a little bit faster. He's got, again, devastating knockout power at the feet. And he's got pretty decent grappling skills overall. I know he was submitted, obviously, in his last fight by Gleison, but I think in most cases he should be okay on the ground as well. So he should be able to neutralize a lot of what Koscheck brings to the table, and he should have above average puncher's chance. So I am going to slightly lean towards the favor here in Ellenberger, because I think in more times than not, he should probably at this stage in their careers get the job done, and he should have enough left in the tank where I think he can get the W over Koscheck. But unlike most, I'm not very confident in this pick, because if Ellenberger does not get the KO win, I mean, I guess it's possible that he gets a decision, but at times, as we all know, Ellenberger tends to get a little bit inactive, and that leads him to some not so great decisions that go against him at times too. So that's my concern in this fight. Ellenberger doesn't get the KO. I'm not sure what's going to happen here, but I'm going to slightly lean towards him because, again, Koscheck coming back from that long layoff, back-to-back knockouts, it kind of sticks in the back of my mind like everybody else. So my official pick is Ellenberger, but not a confident one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree. I do think that Jake Ellenberger is the right side here. The main thing here is you just don't know what Josh Koscheck's motivation is right now. Granted, you know, his 3 losses were all to rock-solid fighters in Tyron Woodley, Johnny Hendricks, and Robbie Lawler. I mean, all those guys are top 5 UFC welterweights right now. So there's nothing wrong with losing to them. But, especially with the way he lost the last 2 fights, you know, just getting dominated, and getting knocked out early, it is a bit of a concern. Now, with Ellenberger, again, his 3 losses, all to solid guys, Rory McDonald, and then of course, you had the most recent fight against Gastelum, and again, all top solid guys. So I think that the fact that they're both on 3-fight losing streaks is a bit overblown due to the strength of competition. But, as Nick mentioned, fight years, or not fight years, but overall age, with Koscheck being 37 and Ellenberger being 29, that is a big concern, especially the fact that Koscheck has been rocked and dropped way more often than Ellenberger has. Facing a guy that with such devastating power as Jake Ellenberger, I mean, it only takes one good shot, and Josh Koscheck's night could be over. I mean, Ellenberger still landed some nice shots in his last fight against Kelvin Gastelum. It's just Gastelum was young, energetic, still had a really good chin, hadn't taken a lot of punishment, and he was just able to eat those shots. I don't think Koscheck would have survived those type of punishing blows if he'd been on the receiving end. So, in this fight, I'm definitely leaning Ellenberger. He is a bit of a front runner. If things don't go his way early, he does have a tendency to lose confidence. So, I'm a bit concerned about that. But I don't think Josh Koscheck's wrestling will be a huge part of this equation because Ellenberger has that great wrestling background as well, and his takedown defense is pretty solid. And overall, I'm not nearly as concerned about Koscheck's striking either, just because his striking, even though people rave about, you know, the advances in his striking, it really never got that good. It just, he has some power and has a couple good fundamental things that he does. So, I think Jake Ellenberger has the advantage just about everywhere, and I'm gonna pick him. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, once again, we have tons of data on these two, and the stats do, I think, agree with some of the key points you guys are zeroing in on. First of all, Koscheck's wrestling has gotten him through some fights. 83% ground control, that's tied with Gleison Tibau for the highest on the card. So he has definitely gotten the better of people on the ground. Now, compare that to Ellenberger. He hasn't been as dominant on the ground, but his individual takedown stats are superior. Both his offense, takedown success rate, and his takedown defense are both much higher than Josh Koscheck. So if you pair Koscheck's, above average but not fantastic wrestling offense, can he compete and get Ellenberger, who has excellent takedown defense, to the mat and keep him there? That's going to be the question here, because I think if these two guys just stand and trade, the numbers are very similar, but small edges go towards Ellenberger. They both have above average power. They have similar accuracy, but Ellenberger is slightly better. They both tend to be reserved and work at a lower than average pace. So they're primarily counter strikers, basically, hoping people come forward, try to bait them in and then take them down, or counter strike and headhunt. Neither guy is going to be throwing a ton of kicks. They are headhunters, and defensively, while they avoid the same rate of strikes, punch for punch, Josh Koscheck, with 6 knockdowns received, his chin rating is definitely worse than the division average. It's actually almost at the heavyweight level, as if he's been getting hit by heavyweights. So that is, I think, the biggest number on this page that just jumps out. Ellenberger, with 8 knockdowns scored, he has good power, good accuracy, better than Koscheck, and he's hitting a chin that is much, much more vulnerable and much older. Josh Koscheck, 37 years old. I mean, there's a big youth advantage for Ellenberger here. So, Again, I see some of the similar themes. If Koscheck were to effectively use his wrestling round to round, that's a path to victory. He could pull off an upset on the decision. But I think these guys will probably be standing more often than not. And when the leather flies, Ellenberger is the more dangerous striker here. So I've got to go with Ellenberger. And I think if they stand and bang long enough, he eventually gets a finish.
Now moving down to the women's bantamweight division for the co-main event of the evening, we have Raquel Pennington, who is 5-5, taking on Holly Holm, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Holm minus 505 to come back on Pennington plus 335. And right now it's Holly Holm 900 to come back on Pennington 600. So I didn't open it quite high enough, in the spot for Holm. Of course, again, another spot that honestly I'm more than familiar with Holly Holm as far as MMA goes. I know that she's got, her boxing background, a world-class, world champion fighter. But even in MMA, I mean, I've been putting lines on her for her legacy fights, throughout her career as well. So, in most cases, I mean, you got to put huge numbers on Holm because she's got that type of hype and that type of ability surrounding her. So I can understand, I guess, the early line movement against Pennington here, but at the same time, Pennington is by far the toughest MMA fight that Holm has faced a fighter for sure. This is going to be a test for her, no doubt about it. I mean, the writing's on the wall. Why they put Holm in the co-main event spot for this pay-per-view and her UFC debut. Obviously, Rousey's headlining the fight, so they want to build Holm up a little bit and get more eyeballs on her as far as the MMA market goes, and I understand it. It's probably a pretty good move. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't know if this fight is really co-main event slot worthy, but I do understand the business aspect of things. So, that being said, I mean, obviously, the UFC is also feeding Holm somebody that she could probably get the W over, so I understand that as well. I mean, Pennington is more known for her striking. She does have some submission skills as well, as she showed in her last fight, pulling off that upset, but overall, I mean, Pennington is not the most dynamic or explosive wrestler, and she doesn't have the best ground attack. So Pennington likes to stand and bang, and she's very successful in most cases. But that's the problem here. I mean, Holm, obviously her boxing, like I said, I mean, she's a southpaw. She has tremendous hands because she is a world-class champion boxer. But not just that. I mean, her kickboxing in general, I think is pretty legit as well. She throws kicks hard, fast, strong. She puts them where she wants. So she can beat you with her legs or her hands. She's very, just her fight IQ is very good too. Every spot as far as stand-up goes, Holm is very game. So Pennington is going to have a lot to worry about on the feet, and that's exactly where Pennington likes to fight. So I think Pennington is going to probably look to take this fight to the floor. So far, Holm has showed pretty solid takedown defense. Of course, she's training with the solid camp in Jackson, so they're going to have her prepared even if the fight hits the floor, at least enough to survive. I believe that as well. So it is Holm's fight to win or lose. If she doesn't get caught in some kind of submission, she probably will win this because she'll outpoint Pennington. Pennington's a tough girl, tough to stop, so I don't think Holm probably knocks her out, but it's a possibility because Holm is that gifted of a striker, so it could happen as well. So it is Holm's fight to win or lose. I understand why everybody's coming in that way, but man, at 900, if you still see value in Holm, you're kind of crazy in this spot, especially let the girl kind of get tested in this spot, see what she's made of, and see what she does under a legit type of fighter, which I believe Pennington is, a very solid fighter. So good spot. I am looking forward to this fight. I think it's going to be fun while it lasts, or if it does go the full 3 rounds, it's going to be a pretty entertaining fight. So I'm leaning towards Holm to win this fight.
And I agree. It seems like it's Holly Holm's fight to lose, but there are some question marks here. Obviously, Holly Holm's strength of competition has not been very good in terms of her MMA career yet. Her boxing career, of course, she was a world champion, so that's completely not a problem. But in MMA, she really hasn't faced anyone that has a tremendous ground game or a really good wrestling attack where she would have to worry about using a lot of the MMA aspects of the sport. So overall, in all of her fights, we've pretty much seen her beat opponents up as a kickboxer. She has very good kicks. I think her kicking game has actually been her best part, even though she comes from the boxing background. She's extremely active with side kicks and leg kicks and head kicks. She's finished fights with head kicks. So Holly Holm is a dynamic striker, and she is a southpaw, so that will present some problems for Raquel Pennington on the feet as well. But overall, we haven't seen a whole lot out of her on the ground, and who knows, maybe Raquel Pennington could get her there. She did look pretty good in her last fight after weathering the early storm from Ashley Evans-Smith,
ended up getting a takedown on Evan Smith, even though Evan Smith was the one from the pretty prestigious wrestling accolades. And then she was able to get that submission. So who knows? If Holly Holm gets stuck on her back against Pennington, and maybe if Pennington just puts her in a bad position, she could walk away with a huge upset. But I'm going to be realistic here. Holly Holm is a tremendous striker. Her boxing is, world class. Absolutely. She's one of the few fighters where you can actually say her boxing is world class in MMA. And I think that if Pennington comes in over aggressive, then Holm is going to light her up. She is a really good counter striker, and I think that she'll be ready for that. And Holm's conditioning is not a problem whatsoever. So even though Pennington has a solid cardio and trains in elevation, Holly Holm trains in Greg Jackson's, so she's trained in the same elevation, and she's gone almost 5 rounds in fights before and ended up getting a finish late in the 5th. So I don't expect any problems for cardio from either of these girls. The only other real difference is the age gap. Obviously, Holly Holm had the whole boxing career first, so she's coming into MMA a little late. She's 33 years old compared to Raquel Pennington's 26. But I don't think that'll be too much of a problem. Holm is a tremendous athlete and has only ever been in a lot of trouble in terms of fights, like one time in her boxing career where she got knocked out. So I don't think that Pennington will have really anything going on the feet. And basically, as long as Holly Holm can keep this fight from getting too ugly in terms of the clinch and on the ground, then Holly Holm is going to piece her up a little bit on the feet. So I expect a bit of a clinic here from Holly Holm. But again, we got a lot of questions that need answering in terms of how she looks against better competition before we can throw her in the mix as a title challenger for Ronda Rousey. But overall, I am going to pick Holly Holm.
Now this brings us to the main event of the evening. We have a women's bantamweight title fight between Ronda Rousey, who is 10-0, and Cat Zingano, who is 9-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Line's been out for quite some time now, but I opened Rousey minus 1,300, the comeback on Zingano plus 700. A lot of people were kind of crazy at the time that I opened the line, thinking that I disrespected Zingano big time. But you know what? It's been fairly steady since. I mean, it's, like I said, it's been out for some time now, and Rousey's minus 900 plus 600 right now at 5 dimes. But there are some spots out there that have it a little bit higher as well. You can get, Zingano right now at DSI at like plus 750. So line staying ballpark, and you know what? I think it's kind of fair and accurate. To be honest with you, I know Zingano, she's a warrior. I have a lot of respect for her. She's a talented fighter. She's well-rounded. You gotta like it because she's probably the biggest test to date for Rousey in some ways, because I think Miesha Tate was obviously Rousey's toughest challenge to date, but Zingano brings to the table, I mean, her toughness. She does have some pretty good power on the feet, good clinch game overall. She's got a good jiu-jitsu game, never been subbed before. So she's a formidable opponent, no doubt about it, but I still think that Zingano recently, I mean, she showed, I think, a little bit more her true colors, which again, she's got that heart of a lion, no doubt about it. She's got that warrior spirit, but against Nunes, she got taken down and she just got beat up bad in round 1 in that fight. I mean, she managed to hang on and pull off the W there, which was amazing to see because that was a tremendous performance by her, but still she got dominated by Nunes. It doesn't sit well for me, honestly. And then going back to the Tate fight as well, she was losing that fight before she came back in the 3rd round of that fight as well. So back-to-back fights where she had to kind of make comeback wins. And both of those girls, even Tate at that time, Tate faded in her fight. Now Tate's cardio, she has had issues at times, but her cardio seems solid overall. But Nunes has always had some cardio issues. So Ronda hasn't showed any signs right now. I know she hasn't been very long in her fights. Most of her fights have been 1 round or less, but still, when she did go a little bit longer, with Miesha Tate, she still looked fresh. She still looked ready to go. If it was round 4, round 5, round whatever, 6, I mean, Rousey's in shape. You could tell I don't think cardio is going to be an issue for her. And I think if Zingano had problems with, stopping Nunes from taking her down, she's not going to be able to stop Rousey taking her down. So I'm expecting what pretty much most people are thinking out there as well. Rousey's going to get in here, take the fight to the floor fairly quick, and probably submit Zingano, be the first person to finish her by sub. Or finish her in any way, because Zingano is an undefeated fighter. So it's going to be another impressive performance by Rousey. The scary thing about Rousey is she just keeps on getting better and better every fight. I mean, she came in to the UFC still kind of raw. She's developing her striking attack and it's getting better. I mean, we've seen her clinch game, her knees to the body. I mean, she was able to finish McMahon with that. She's got a little bit of power in her hands now as well. She's got more confidence. So for the women out there, it's only going to get worse because Rousey's only going to get better. That's the scary thing here. So she's a huge favorite for a reason. I do believe that Rousey's going to get the W here. Zingano's going to be game, but it's just not going to be enough, and Rousey's going to retain that title. So my official pick is Ronda Rousey.
I do also have a lot of respect for Kat Zingano, but Ronda Rousey is just on a completely other level. I'm not even going to waste a whole lot of time with this breakdown. Kat Zingano's biggest strengths are she has really good, devastating strikes when she's in top position on the ground in control, and she's very dangerous in the clinch with knees and elbows. But overall, she just has some problems in terms of coming out to slow starts and having to come back in fights. And her takedown game is really kind of predicated on throws. And I mean, who's going to throw Ronda Rousey? It's just not going to happen. So I see Ronda's judo shutting down all of Zingano's takedown offense completely. And in terms of heart, that's really where Zingano has had the biggest strength, is she just weathers the storm from her opponents and then just comes on strong and gets the finish. I mean, both of her UFC wins are late stoppages. So I really don't think that's going to happen against Ronda Rousey. As Nick mentioned, Ronda had no problem going into the third round against Miesha Tate. I don't think she has any cardio concerns whatsoever. She's answered all those questions. And against Kat Zingano, if Ronda just starts really hard and strong, she could just completely overwhelm Kat before she has a chance to settle in and finish her quickly, even though Zingano is extremely talented. Zingano is really dangerous, but Ronda's going to be better in open space. Ronda's clinch is going to be better because she'll be able to just throw around Zingano when Zingano's trying to land those strikes. And on the ground, Ronda's the better scrambler and definitely the more dangerous ground fighter with her submissions. So I don't really see a lot of avenues for success for Kat Zingano, and I think that Ronda Rousey comes in here and takes care of business. She's on a mission, and I think that she's going to try to make a statement again with this fight against Zingano. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the numbers aren't even really helpful in a matchup like this, just because I don't think anyone in the division is anywhere close to Ronda Rousey. We just haven't seen her truly get challenged. She is someone who is able to exploit any small mistake in a heartbeat. Her arm bars, her submissions, her sweeps, even now her striking, they seem to come so effortlessly. She can finish a fight without even having to exert herself. And that's what makes her so dangerous, because these are all 5-round fights. I don't think that anyone is going to be able to hang with her for a long period of time and try to grind her out, because at some point you get tired, just as Miesha Tate did a couple times, and then you succumb to the armbar because she can just pull it out of her hat at any time. So the question here is not if, but when. When does Ronda Rousey win and how? I do think it'll be more likely to be a submission because Zingano does spend a lot of her time on the mat. She has gotten herself into some bad positions, and has overcome, I think, just outworking people and her fitness. But she has been controlled on the ground by other people. And against Ronda Rousey, you can't even allow that to happen for a heartbeat. So I think at some point this hits the mat and Rousey does get a submission. From a betting standpoint, the only things you consider are whether or not this is going to last one round or a round and a half, which is the current total. Because Rousey inside the distance prop is also almost near minus 500. You know, it's barely long parlay fodder at this point. So it's a very tough fight to really see much value in unless you're looking for a specific type of finish for Rousey, or if you're looking for the round one finish. Zingano might be a little bit more durable than her opponents, and that's the only reason why I might back off trying to predict the round one finish. But Rousey inside the distance is, I think it's going to happen one way or the other.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 184. Part 2 of our Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker premium member. And if you'd like to become a premium member, just head over to MMAOddsbreaker.com. The top right corner should have a thing about signing up for premium, and it should be a pretty simple process.
Now, if we have any free plays to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.